Hello, welcome to Big 20, where we go behind the GM screen. My name is Dan, and this week I'm joined by...
And I'm Mike.
All right, so as we sometimes do, I'm going to kick off with a question because for those who don't know, I am the youngest, the least tenured GM of us, and I have a lot of questions, and I also like to tinker a lot. So the question I'm going to pose to you like this. Imagine your game group is your marriage, right? And you've been together for a really long time and you want to spice things up, right? But people have certain expectations because of this is how we've always done it, right? So my question is, how do you, we're talking about GMing for established gamers, how do you break them of certain expectations, i.e. like, Sturgy is always a con save, or monsters don't have class. Like, one thing I thought that D&D 4th edition did was really interesting. Like, some monsters were like boss monsters, or you had hierarchy of monsters within, like you had an orc, or you had like a leader orc, and they had more abilities. But these kind of things are kind of jarring for older gamers because that's not what an orc is. So how do we fix that's not what an orc is problem when you want to do something new to surprise people? Because I think that in the end is the goal. Is I would like to surprise people. So how do you do that and mess with established ideas? So that's kind of where what I wanted to ask, because I like to tinker and fuck with shit.
So you're talking about rules that aren't already built into whatever edition you're playing?
Who cares about the rules? Yeah. That's me, right? But I know a lot of people don't like that. So I guess how would you approach your table and say, I want to present a different mindset for an orc, for instance, right? And does this question make any sense? Like,
we'll see.
Yes. Right. I mean, I realize this is a very who moved my cheese kind of a thing, right? I don't know, for people who have had to go through corporate America, you have to watch or read the book Who Moved My Cheese, and it's all about dealing with change. So I guess part of the goal here is the long-term game that I ran, and I think most people enjoyed it, and they thought it worked out pretty good. I had one super new player, super new. Like this was definitely their first long-term game, and they'd only played a handful of D&D sessions before, and that's our friend Boshi, who is here on Twitch. And then a whole bunch of established players who have played the game even more than I have for years and years and years. So over here, I can create a sense of wonder by describing something, but I'm boring everyone over here because they know exactly what it is before I've even begun to describe it, right? Because we know this is an orc, this is a kobold, these are the things that they are. What helped things along a little bit was 5th edition was very new to everyone. So like when I busted out the kobolds, things like pack tactics were really new and interesting, right? So, and that kind of set people. So I want to do more things like that. Here's our orc, but there might be a little bit more to them than they're just not mindless. I want to inject like personality and interesting things, going into it.
So you want to give things like creatures powers and abilities that they normally wouldn't have.
Because in 5th edition, one of the things I fell in love with, and why I think the Monster Manual is really, really underrated book for this current system, is the lair abilities. And they really only gave them to like bigger characters, bigger, dragons have lair abilities. Like this set of things that monsters can do that interrupt the player's actions, or they occur after a player action, to make the fight more favorable to the monster, and it gets even better. Home field advantage. Yeah, home field advantage. Things like that, right? But when you don't have a book saying it's okay, then people can kind of tend to call foul, right? And say, I don't want to be a dick, but I want to make things interesting. And a lot of times that means making things a little harder or making things a little bit more lethal. So I guess I don't know how to approach that.
In 3rd edition, you could always customize monsters by giving them levels and things. I don't know if that's still the case in, like, say, 5th edition D&D. I don't know if you can assign character levels to monsters.
I see. But
it's be much easier, more streamlined to just say, oh, well, so-and-so creature has the rogue abilities to dash and hide and sneak attack.
See, I love the idea of monsters with a degree of intelligence, right? Monsters can have classes. There's no reason there isn't an orc thief, right? But it's never ironed out that way. It's never like really set in stone, but there's absolutely no reason there can't be an orc thief.
Yeah, and I'm all for boss creatures having lair powers, even.
They should do
the current edition
D&D, because I'm positive they're watching. Just do a book, redo the monster manual, and give everything some type of lair abilities, because they're amazing. It's one of the best parts of this current edition, I think. It's advantage, disadvantage, and lair abilities, and everything else is like miles behind it. Yes. We'll have to consult Mike. I have never encountered a black pudding, and I feel as though I am less for it.
Fire hurts most things.
Well, here I think is what's driving at the point is who cares? If I want my black pudding to be susceptible to fire, it is, right? So, yes, I want my black pudding raging. Yes, bubbling and all right. So, I guess part of this is the story of how to pluck out that metagaming tendency, and we do it. I mean, we do it without even thinking about it, and it's impossible to unlearn the things that we have learned. So, I guess that's why I kind of want to reteach things. I want to present things in a different way. Because I guess another thing is I like to pick and choose. I personally, I enjoy D&D. I don't think D&D does everything right. I think D&D orcs are some of the most vanilla lame orcs there are, because I gauge everything by the Games Workshop standard that has the best orcs ever made by the longest of the biggest of margins, right? I want Games Workshop orcs in my D&D giant, because in Warhammer 40K or in Fantasy Orc Society, the bigger you are, the more powerful you are, and the higher ranking you are, right? And orcs in that world are really varied, but from the highest in war bosses and shamans and things like that, down to your lowly piddly orcs who get bossed around and, get beat up just for the sake of taking their teeth, right? So, or a Kai, yeah. Right. Well, and so what I would enjoy doing is you have a scenario, and you roll up, and like four orcs are not a threat to any average party, right? Traditional D&D orcs. But I want to present them in this other way. Like, these are Games Workshop really aggressive, and these four orcs are probably going to just destroy you. But I don't think you can't lead off with that, because Angry GM, this was a tweet many, many, many moons ago. I have to paraphrase because I only vaguely remember it. But the gist was, you can't spring something on your players out of nowhere. That is GM dirty pool, right? Because they have a certain level of buy-in. It's like if we never had a secret door for the first 8 levels of a campaign, but all of a sudden now there is one. Like, I have trained my party to not think about secret doors, right? So whenever the time comes where there is one, they're going to miss it, because I have set the parameters, and there are certain expectations of the game. It's kind of like game expectations, I guess, and how you can't just spring stuff on people. So that's the other difficult part of doing something like this, is because it is all springing things onto people. Yeah. It's GM dirty pool. It is. Well, as long as they know that it's on the table, right? As long as you're aware that, a fucking could be coming, right? And I'm not springing it on them. It's like you're going about your merry way, fights, players win, unwinnable TPK. Like you can't spring that on them, right? You have to TPK them the first night, as you have taught us, Eric. So this is officially on the table. You could all get wiped at any time. Yes. I suggest anyone watching do it. It was the most. Death is around the corner. Yes, it totally set the tone. It completely changed the way we played at that point. This is and that was jarring, and that was completely out of left field. And had that not been for an actual play, like a structured thing, like if that were the beginning of a regular campaign, that may have put people off, like because maybe they got to invest in their character or somebody rolled really good, right? So I don't know that that's always going to work, but I still suggest everyone try it. What, I guess another question would be about, they're saying that they can't hear you, Eric. I don't know. I can hear you just fine. I don't know.
Yeah, I can hear you, but no one else in the can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I mean, I think us in the Zoom can hear you, but you'll have to ask the viewers.
That's weird. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, this is
we're getting some yeses now.
Break. Yes now, yay! All that
yes
great
now.
shit. You missed all of it too. All of it.
Yes, it was gold. Just accept that. It's gold.
It certainly was.
So let's think about, it's not all about monsters. Expectations of things like your magic items are different than what you know magic items to be. I think you get a little bit more license with magic items because they're not as set in stone. But what if you want to do things like a sword that grows with you, right? A sword that levels, maybe.
Yeah.
I've seen rules on that.
Oh, okay. So this is these kind of things are established. So what other?
Well, I wouldn't say established. It's just that these are things I've come across in magazines before in the past, and
whoa, there, old man.
Best I would call, I'm just saying. Best I would call these home house rules and things.
House rules.
Unless they find their way into some kind of hardback book.
Well, and one thing we do know is that you can over house rule. I mean, this is the thing we know. Like, you can overhouse rule. I'm pretty sure. What other expectations do you think players have going in that
well, I mean,
might be hard to tackle?
Backing up, because for those of you who couldn't hear me for the first 20 minutes of this show, you know, defying expectations is actually part of the narrative itself. I mean, you don't, not just in encounters, you're doing it for the narrative, right? You have to set up things. You can't spring things on people, because then it they come out of their immersion, or it's like, where the fuck did this even come from? You know, you have to set,
or what is he up to, and is he, you know, like, what is he up to?
Right.
Why is he doing this?
Right. So if you establish it as, you know, the Baron says, you know, these orcs are not like any orcs I've ever seen. They're the more organized. They do things that normal orcs don't do. Then when they do encounter those orcs, then it's like, oh, these are those special orcs, or these are, you know, maybe these aren't even orcs at all. Maybe these are something else posing as orcs. You know, you could always do something like that. Going back though, Mike, remember you were a little bit ago, you were talking about adding classes to monsters. There was also something else that I'm not sure applies in 5th edition, but it certainly was 3.5. Pathfinder does it a lot, and that's the templates. You know, like you know, infernal template, or, you know, something like that, where they have extra powers. But then again, a lot of those you could tell, maybe by looking at them or something like that, there was just something a little different about them. Something that I like to do when you're talking about how to kind of present things differently is you don't give everything away all at once, right? And, you know, saying,
okay,
hey, there's 3 orcs. Okay, everybody knows what that is. But if you're doing an encounter, and I did this one time with a hook horror. It was a,
say that 3 times fast,
hook
by
horror,
the way.
hook horror, hook horror.
Yeah.
It just kind of runs together after that. But it was a honeycombed cave, and the player characters were, you know, inspecting it, and there was a hook horror, like, den, and as they were looking through it, the one player character climbed up to the, you know, into the hole to look, and as I did the description from the other player character's perspective, so they saw Tommy crawling up the thing, and then 2 things jutting out of his chest, as, you know, as this hook horror, you know, impaled him on his hooks.
Had you recently watched Hellraiser?
I don't recall, but probably. But it was one of those things where you had, you know, they were like, what is that? They've been up against hook horrors before, but if you do it from a, you know, you kind of change the camera angle, or you don't give them exactly everything all the way up front, you know.
Time out.
Time out, he says.
Eric Boshi said in chat, says that sounds like your mic's not working, that you're coming in through built-in mic.
Okay.
I mean, they can hear you, but it's like the problem I was having earlier. I can barely hear you.
All right.
So maybe Zoom is using your Tile and Twitch.
I don't know. Let me look and see here. No, that's using that. Let me look at the other one. No, they're both using the same thing.
Weird.
Turn my stuff up, I guess. Maybe my mic's not. Checking 1, 2, 3. I'm getting a full. Hold on a second. How about that?
It's weird because in the Zoom we're fine.
Yeah, we're fine.
Yeah,
I think it's all
changes.
going through. It's not Zoom. It's
OBS, or
yeah.
What do you use?
I use
Streamlabs.
Yeah. So yeah, I think some of the settings were jacked up for whatever reason. That's okay. Well, on the replay, I'll grab the audio from the Zoom. So those of you who missed half the shit I've been saying,
All right.
Just wait.
just wait. It was
wait.
It was freaking awesome. I assure you.
Emmerich says it sounds louder.
Hey,
Okay.
all right,
Good.
great. But anyway, you tell it from a different perspective, or you don't give away everything all at once, right? And the other part of that is the point that I was going to make is I don't give a shit if the player has encountered these things before. Your character has not, unless
Right.
So don't say it's an orc. Describe the creature itself. They let the players make the connections that they want to make. Oh my gosh, this is a hobgoblin. No, it's not. It's not really a hobgoblin, but they've never encountered a hobgoblin before, so let them think that. Who cares? Or some sort of demon. Oh, that's it's not really a demon. It's just it's an urukai, but hey, whatever you want to think, right?
To the clergy, everything's a demon in Forgotten Realms, right?
Good point.
Everybody's a heretic. Everything's a demon. Well, no, heretic. That would be 40K again.
Right.
So this reminds me of way back when, this is AD&D era, when the Planescape book came out. The Planescape book did this for groups, and maybe that's what I need, or we need now, is something that comes out that is so vastly different that it changes people's perspective on what monsters are or can be. Because Planescape brought the planes down to the player level almost, right? It wasn't just fluff anymore. Like it breathed life into it, and now these are things that you can use and you can manipulate, and it's like it's all on the table now. So maybe, we see this there's all kinds of Kickstarters over the years for other monster manuals, and Pathfinder has got monster manuals on lockdown, right? They're up to like 7 or 8 in the edition of Pathfinder, probably more. Right, I think, and maybe that's what D&D is lacking for me, is there's
More
just
monsters.
not enough. More monsters, more ways to make interesting encounters, right? Because you can only beat on 30 orcs for so many careers of so many characters, right?
But
and then before they become uninteresting.
Well, that's actually interesting then, because you just jogged my memory here.
Okay.
The book I used 2 Sundays ago on our game night was not Xanathar's, Volo's Guide to Monsters.
Yep.
And I had you run into some orcs that were like plague orcs. They
were terrible. Yeah,
but they were plague orcs. So that's the variants you're talking about.
Mm-hmm, exactly. That kind of stuff. And I guess at the time, this is happening. I'm asking a question and it's happening, and I didn't even realize it was happening. Because of the way Mike was describing it, I wasn't even thinking orc. Truthfully, I kept thinking Nurgle. I was thinking infested humanoids. I think Nurgle. I don't think orc with, God only knows what disease. Right. So that's what Eric's saying. Don't give it all away.
Right.
And Mike is saying this already exists.
Sure.
Damn it.
Yeah, Wizards always has that.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, though, that for the most part, we are not pro splat book, but, and I say we as a game,
the royal we.
The royal we. But I think that goes away when you're talking about monster manuals or creature books, because I think next to a player's handbook, I think a creature manual is probably one of your most used books, maybe even more than a DMG. Because
definitely,
how often are you referencing the DMG in gameplay, whereas your monster manual, you're probably always in it as a game master.
Yeah, I can see that.
So having more monster manuals, probably a good idea. So in that, I think Pathfinder has it right, because they have a ton of monster manuals, but I think, compared to their other library, hell, they're probably going to have, monster bestiaries coming out for first edition after second edition's already been released, just the way that they release things. So you never really know. But going back to, also the defying expectations and things like that too, in story, not just in creatures, but in story. That's one of the main things, if you ever take a creative writing class, or, especially if you have anybody teaching you how to outline a story or something like that, one of the first things that they say is, what is expected? Take your genre and what is expected, and how can you defy that expectation? And do that with everything you do in your game. That's one of the things I love to do, is to sit there and make these almost like spur of the moment gut changes within a game, because sometimes those can be a lot of fun, where all of a sudden you change one little thing and it completely turns an encounter around. It can become something that's totally memorable. And I'll give you an example. In the adventure path with the Storm King's Thunder, in the very beginning, there's a cloud giant who floats around in a tower, and he's supposed to be a little eccentric or whatever, but he's not supposed to be a villain or anything like that. But player character tendency is monster killing.
Assume it's a villain.
So as I'm running this adventure, I look down and I'm looking at the Wizards of the Coast book, and it's got the picture of the giant, and he looks a little kind of he looks a little eccentric. And I thought, okay, I could kind of play him a little eccentric maybe. And then I look at the picture of the tower, and I swear to you, it looks like a high-heeled shoe. And I'm like, that's a little weird.
Kind of like old Mother Hubbard.
Yeah,
Storm Giant style.
Right, except this giant floats around in a 9-inch nail, right? So I was like, that's a little odd. So then I decided, well, I'm going to kind of twist this a little bit, and instead of being just a little eccentric, he's going to be kind of like the cloud giant version of Frankenfurter. And I kind of played him that way. Very, very eccentric, very kind of over the top. And the players responded very well to that, because it was not anything near what they expected to happen. He spoke very flamboyantly. He was, he absolutely loved the player characters. He thought they were great. And they responded really well, to the point where, I mean, guys were like 3rd level or something like that. One of the player characters retired to just go floating around with the giant, because she was like,
and why wouldn't you? To be quite honest,
this is the be all end all. I'm going to stay here. I think she ended up being like the giant's purse pet, So, I mean, that's. Do things like that. Everything doesn't have, number one, everything doesn't have to be a fight. Like Boshi says, everything doesn't have to be an epic battle. So even an encounter that could be a fight doesn't necessarily have to be, right?
Yeah, and I want more of that, actually, because that does happen. Every encounter is a fight when you just don't want it to be, for either time constraints or whatever. So I think that again, that's another difficult preconceived notion, is that every night we're going to have an encounter, right? And I know that's how we have tended to play D&D in the past, and I'm sure that there are plenty of groups who don't, and they'll sit down and they'll riff and they'll role play out things and maybe even not even roll a dice. Again, those are expectations that the group may have.
Yeah. And you might have players who, are totally down for that. You might also have players who totally hate it. Stop talking to my XP, quit messing with my loot, that kind of thing. But I don't know, man. I think I found most players nowadays are much more receptive to talking it out or figuring it out, or like our friend Jason likes to do. He likes to look at it from the perspective of the goblins. I'm going into their house. Maybe these goblins, there's a reason why these goblins are doing what they're doing, and they're not just all murder monsters. Maybe there's a reason behind everything.
See, these are the kind of things that I want to play with, right? And and use, it could fall flat and people could be bored. I guess that for me is the fear that you have a night where you do something that's so not the norm that it brings people out of it and it might be boring. And that, I think those kind of things could kill a game that's running, and then it's dead. And we've all seen games come to a screeching halt before. So these are the kind of things that I'm always thinking about in the back of my mind when the tinkering part of my brain starts working.
Real quick, shout out to Anna Meyer, who's in chat.
I've never heard of her. What does she do? Something interesting?
Yeah, she's a fantastic map maker, y'all.
Yes. Mike,
so
you were supposed to steal the giant mural painting that she did, but you have yet to do that. Because that needs to be the backdrop for Big 20.
And one of our viewers, Pablo Escobar the second, he's never played D&D or any role-playing game before, so he has no expectations.
See, that's exactly what you want.
Right.
That's the. I mean, I was very fortunate that I had Brandy, who had nearly no role-playing experience, a handful of sessions. So I got to do all of those things. And I think the average GM, they don't get that experience because we don't get a whole lot of new people, especially when you're doing something that's long-term. And I was fortunate that actually kind of worked out and it was long-term. So I got to do all of those things. I got to see a player be surprised by things and work through scenarios that everybody else at the table maybe had done 2 decades earlier. But for this person, it's new. And as Eric, I know you know from gaming with your daughter, they bring different ways to solve problems.
Absolutely. And not only that,
Yeah.
not only did you have that, but there's the unsaid thing is you also had a group of players who allowed her to do that. Because
anybody who games with Brandy knows she runs the show.
Well, but I'm saying that you could have a group of players totally spoil all of that, and
sure.
I think kudos to them for not spoiling it. And I know, it's the minute Jason started to spoil something, then she would jump his shit, and then everything, he would, be like, oh, sorry.
Got to keep him in check.
Right.
Yeah, you got to keep him in check.
Right.
So this is about buy-in. Really, this is about buy-in and the trust, because it kind of gets overlooked sometimes. There's a trust relationship between your players and your GM. Like, just kind of bear with me here, right? I want to do something cool, but I want to do something cool for you. And it may seem like I'm just kicking your ass or I'm doing these weird things, but like, it's a journey. Like, I want you to come along with it because in my mind, it's going to be awesome, right? Not everything's awesome. I get that, but that's the hope. It's the buy-in. It's that trust relationship that you're trying to build, and the fear that you're going to break that trust relationship if you do something out of the ordinary, something that they don't expect.
Right. Yeah, and that's certainly the risk, because trust, that level of trust is easy to break and hard as hell to get back. Because
exactly. That's why, see, on the surface, this seems like this is a no-brainer thing, but like, the more you think about it, it's kind of important. When you move people's cheese, people tend to not like their cheese moved. Like, anybody who's worked at any job that has had to go through change knows that it can be really unsettling, and it doesn't always work out. And generally it means people are being fired, but
well, hell, not even just that. I mean, just a change in, like a computer structure or something like that. We're going through that at work, where they're upgrading the computer systems to something else that's bigger but scarier, because they're, this is not the way we used to do things. And that very much applies to games, especially with older gamers. And that's why I find that a lot of times I'll run a new game because it switches that expectation. It's like, oh, this is a new game. This is Warhammer Fantasy. Orcs aren't.
We can
quite
do
the
whatever
same.
we want with
We
it.
can do whatever.
Don't.
I can have chaos warriors, marching down your throat. So that's one of the appeals of running new games. But I think a good mix of new players and old players who have a good buy-in and a good respect for the game master, and that's another thing that you earn that respect as a game master. You have to maintain it by defying some expectations, but not pushing it too far. If you start straying too far from the established rules, and some people are like, rules schmools, but it's not. You're playing a game, and it's for a reason. And
it's designed in a certain way. Yeah, I get that. A lot of this gets to the old adage: if it's not broke, don't fix it. My counter to that, to myself, is sometimes you don't know something is broken until you mess with it a little bit. And we would never have anything better if we never tinkered with rules, right? We wouldn't progress. And I guess for me, it is not about change for the sake of change. It is about change for trying to do something interesting or fun or maybe even better, whatever that may be, whatever better means, right?
One of my favorite things that Mike does is he'll throw something out there, and it like you were talking about with the plague orc, totally threw that out there, and then sat back, didn't tip his hand, didn't say, oh, you guys, this was this or this is that, and he does that with stories too. Mike will he'll throw a nugget out there and then just sit there and let you chew on it for a year. He's good about letting you believe whatever you think is right. Like, he wants you to believe that you're right when he knows that you are wrong. Right. And then he gets to prove it to you, like you say, a year or two later. Right. Oh, you thought this for the longest time. No, that wasn't the case. Right. Foolish boys. That guy totally wasn't your friend, and he totally wasn't mentally challenged. He just assumed that he was, so he just said, oh, this is my end.
Yeah.
Okay,
can we real talk for a minute? This is real talk. So when we talk about player expectations, Mike has trained an entire group of people, nearly an entire generation of people, to not trust the GM. How do I break that expectation? Like, I'm not here to screw you guys. I can't do the long play. I am just not capable of this. Please trust me. How can yes, Mike, you've screwed me. I don't know if you realize this.
What you need to do, I think, in that regard, is that makes your session 0 that much more important and much stronger. If you come out and say, I am not a long play GM, I'm not the screw you over GM, I'll play within the rules and I may fudge some things, but I am pro player. Please know this from the beginning. You can trust me. Even if somebody's passing me notes, it's not necessarily, or if I'm passing somebody else notes, it's not necessarily me saying, you're getting screwed. It could be, hey man, you totally missed that secret door. Something like that. I mean, you're building rapport with the players, and especially when you're in a long-term group with like an established game master who's been running for years and years and years. And I found this when I would run things early on. The expectation is that I am going to run a game like Mike runs a game. And I had to establish very early that I'm not going to. Not that Mike runs a bad game. That's not even remote.
No, we're talking about shoes to fill.
Right.
Right. I mean, honestly, that's what this is. And that's like, Mike, for the longest time, what was the game you wouldn't run? I can't remember. It's the One Ring.
The game I wouldn't run?
Yeah, you won't run. You won't run Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Middle Earth, right?
Right, because these are shoes that you are stepping into. This is the same reason I kind of never really wanted to do D&D, but Brandon bought the adventure, so I ran it. I would never, like, if it were up to me, I would have never run D&D ever because of these shoes. For the same reason, I will probably never run Shadowrun, because in my mind, that's Eric's game, right? So sometimes you have to, as a GM, I guess you have to find your own way. You have to make your own way. And I think sometimes doing that in a completely different game is the way to go. For me, that I still want that to be Savage Worlds one day, whenever I get the opportunity to do it. But yeah, because players have certain, like Mike, you have trained a group of people that of D&D is this, right? And Eric has presented Shadowrun in a particular way, and we have done it for so long. It's kind of hard to see these things any other way.
Yeah, Brandy, we're not playing Lord of the Rings.
No.
Nope.
Those are hard shoes to fill, even though it looks really good. The Cubicle 7 Lord of the Rings stuff look really good.
Yeah. I think that, sure, I get what you're saying, but there's also, Mike has run Shadowrun, you know?
Yes.
I've ran D&D. We've both run Mutants and Masterminds, you know? It's just a matter of sometimes it's much like writing. When you're writing something, a lot of times you're using influences and you're writing in a certain style or something like that, like someone that you really enjoy. You kind of do the same thing with being a game master. You know what you know, and you're going to know how you play how you know. So it's just a matter of doing it. Dan, I think you would run a great Shadowrun game. I think you would, because you know the world as well as anybody else, and you can.
I would prefer to leave that in a theoretical state. You just assume it's wonderful,
right? And you know, it's just a matter of actually doing. Because once you do it, then you're like, you know what, that's not so bad, you know. And maybe for people who are maybe running for an established group, running the game that they've been playing for years, you know, as a new game master, I could see where that could be kind of daunting. Maybe running it online for a group of people you don't know or barely know, or, you know, maybe don't know Shadowrun, you know, do something like that. But, you know, there is that hardwired expectation of this is what the game is supposed to be about. And I mean, for old gamers, I mean, you're talking like dungeon crawl, and you're talking, you know, some of the, you know, hex crawl and stuff like that, where, I mean, there's been plenty of times where we've been sitting at the table and Jason looks over at me and is like, man, I can't wait till we get to a dungeon crawl, because that's what he remembers. That's the nostalgia kicking in. You know, the reality is dungeon crawls are freaking boring. You know,
can be. Yeah.
I mean,
sure.
If you do it the old school style, you know, sometimes they just, you know, searching every 5 feet, all that other stuff. I mean, that's the old game. That's the some people love the old game, but you know, if you have a mixed bag of players, they're not all going to be into that. So, you know, the expectation is.
So I did this in the game because in the back of my mind, speaking of dungeon crawls and breaking with expectations, is I have never understood why when you go into a dungeon, the first encounter doesn't aggro basically everyone else in the dungeon, right? Because sounds echo and everything can be heard. So at the beginning of Horde of the Dragon Queen, I was doing this, and like they would go in and they would just get hit by wave after wave because I was just assuming everybody in the dungeon would come. You know, so it was making these front-loaded, really difficult fights, and then they go and explore the rest of the dungeon. It was just a different way of doing a dungeon crawl, and I don't know how different that was. It made the encounters different. Of course, D&D was new, and especially that adventure was written basically for an edition of the rules that wasn't complete yet, so it was even more kind of quirky. But it's doing things like that, where this room isn't isolated from the rest of the dungeon. And if you have an encounter here, more things are coming.
Right.
You know, and you have to be prepared for that, for like King of the Hill style wave upon wave of people. And, you know, it's a dungeon crawl, but it's doing it in a completely different mindset, I guess.
Yep,
Not much love for the dungeon crawl in chat.
Oh, no. Well, again, it's... Maybe you do break with an expectation and you do run it this way, and you get stuck and you can't, you know. Then we do what we often talk about is that grind, that pressure cooker, where you never get to rest and you're out of everything. And what do? Then it becomes you're in the dungeon and it's really about survival. Yep. It's not about clearing it for the sake of clearing it Diablo style. It's about you're down here, you're maybe trapped, and you could die. And even in a game as player friendly as 5e D&D, it becomes a pressure cooker and you're out of resources. Yeah. That's another topic. This is why I think resources are really important in the game.
Sure. I actually did exactly what you're talking about with the wave upon wave of bad guys. I just did that in my last game.
And how did that go? Because I imagine they weren't prepared for it.
Well, one PC died, but they were in an isolated area where this like tribe of people who are completely cut off from everything and have completely degenerated into these savages. They encountered a small group, and then once they went out into the open, they made noise, and all of a sudden they just descended on them to try and take them out. And as I thought about it, I was like, well, what am I doing? I'm essentially just gutting the entire, adversarial part of this. Essentially, it's a dungeon crawl. There are these huts in this underground area with a lake and all that other crap. And I'm thinking, man, that what are they going to do now? And then I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? What I just did was I eliminated probably multiple nights of grind, because wave upon wave upon wave, player characters took out all the chumps and a boss. So now they're going to explore these other areas. They're not going to have to, worry too much about ambushes or things like that. They can actually go in and sweep the area pretty quickly and encounter things that maybe were isolated or cut off from this tribe of people. They can take their time and look at some things, and they're not doing the 5 foot advance game.
Yeah. Clear out the threat, and then you really get to ransack the place.
That's exactly basically every small unit tactics. It's like textbook. You don't see the Navy SEALs going into somewhere and going room to room, just not worrying about hostiles. They're going room to room, but they're not necessarily just going to stop in this room, and they're going to sit and they're going to
they're clearing everything,
and shit like that, and hope there's not bad guys elsewhere in this compound.
They're probably not going to go sleep for 8 hours either.
Well, no.
And spike the door because it's safe now.
Right. It's clear,
the good old spike in the door.
It's clear the enemy, then look around. I mean, that's pretty basic stuff. So, and to expect players to do something differently and play it the old school way, which, I mean, the old school dungeon crawl was basically a board game, and the game has evolved well past its board game roots.
Sure. And this is kind of the whole heart of this is I like taking what we know and retrofit it back and make that dungeon crawl more interesting. Make those old orcs that you've battled a million times, make them more interesting with the knowledge of what we know now.
Right.
And injecting it's putting a new lease on this really old life, right? Yep. And hopefully create a new experience for your players. Again, this is a topic for another day, but I very much am of the mindset that the game, it's not about telling a story in the game, it's about the story of the game and creating memories about the game, maybe independent of the plot lines or character hooks or whatever. It's about creating memorable moments that become the story of the game.
Right.
And I truly think you can only do this by jarring people and stepping outside of expectations and doing something new. Otherwise, it gets lost in was that the other time we fought the orcs in the thing? Or was it the other time we fought the orcs in the very similar thing? Right?
Right. Yeah.
New. Different.
It all runs together.
Spicing it up.
Yeah.
We need a little spice.
One good tactic that I see is underutilized, and some game masters do it a lot. But if you want to spice up an encounter, let's say we go back to the orcs that we
add a second
about.
GM.
No, well,
maybe?
no, that's although that's
different. I'm sorry, that's a different thing.
No, give the bad guys some loot. You know, you got to watch out, because whatever you give the monsters, you're ultimately just giving the players, our player characters. But
right,
give them disposable loot. I'm talking potions. I'm talking wands, things like that. I mean, because then the player characters are going, that motherfucker just drank my potion. That's my potion.
That's my potion.
That's my wand. Stop expending all the charges out of my new wand.
Along these lines, and I know this is probably something that only I think about, and I know that I have problems, is my love affair of gear. And things wear out, especially in environments like what we're talking about. And the players have to take these old, raggedy, nasty boots off this orc or this whatever, because what they have no longer functions.
Sure. Absolutely.
Something as simple as boots. But just doing that and injecting something so different as to say wear and tear, because wear and tear is a minutia of the game that often I think gets overlooked. I'm sure there are rules for it somewhere, but these are things that happen. And I want to say, oh, by the way, the soles on your shoes are shot. Your shoes, or they got ate by rats in the night, or who knows, whatever. So now you're walking around barefoot.
Yep.
And like, I'm scoping out people's boots, right?
And I know the Conan game has an upkeep where you actually like spend some of your money from the previous adventure, and that it's assumed that you're doing upkeep to your wear and tear and stuff like that. And we haven't gotten into it in my game yet, but I am going to give the players the option to opt out of the upkeep expenditures, and then you can have gear failure. If you don't have enough money to cover your upkeep, then you're looking at, the sole of your boot may fall off, or the straps of your shield may be just too worn, and then all of a sudden it's not effective anymore. When the funny thing is, people want to say, "Oh, I don't care about gear. I don't care about gear," until you start breaking their fucking gear, and then they start caring about that shit.
Right, because again, that's an expectation that they're not. And of course, again, this goes back to what I was saying previously: is you can't spring that on them, right? I can't in the middle of a campaign say, "Oh, your sword just shattered," or "You have no boots. You have no, rats ate your." This should happen by all rights. Rats ate your rations in the night, and now you have no food, right? I mean, Mike, you laugh, but like, this has got to be somewhere, right? But you can't spring this on your players out of nowhere. And I guess that's the hard part, is being upfront about it
in a smaller, a smaller setting. I mean, they're camping in the woods, and they get attacked by a bear. And then the bear is, maybe they're fighting one bear, and the other bear is going through their food, like Yogi Bear.
That's exactly what I was thinking of, yes. Yogi Bear, stepping outside of your players' expectations.
I guess it depends on how many players you're working with.
Okay. Oh, well, okay, that's actually something I hadn't really thought of. So you think this only works in a small group?
Well, like Eric's deal with the Conan game he ran last time, he has 7 players, I think. Yeah. So that would work a lot different if it had been 4 players, let's say. I think when you have a lot of players, I've seen this in our past games, we have up to like 10 or more people. You have to compensate with that, with having everything has to scale up. And naturally, when you have less people, you can get more done. So if you're running a dungeon crawl, you can get through more material faster that way. So I guess the expectation is when there's a lot of players, then you should know that things are going to slow down.
So injecting these speed bumps become less and less interesting and more of a cumbrance because there's too many people at the table.
Well, I think what Eric did was probably the best thing because it did cut out a lot of that minutia that would have took 7 people forever to search those caves. And actually, we had split the group, and splitting group could also help in that regard. Then cover more area, at the same time. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, we about hit that time.
You can only do so much. Oh yeah, we're about at that time. I understand you can only do so much, and I know you can over tinker, and you can put people off by doing this, by breaking people's expectations. I guess this is about finding your place as a GM. Like, what is your style? How do you want to run things? And making the game your own, putting your own stamp on it, so people get a unique experience out of it whenever you're running. I guess that's what I'm shooting for, maybe.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, for those of you who haven't watched us before, we go live 9 p.m. Central every Wednesday. We do take one Wednesday off a month for another reason, but we will be back next week. If you don't follow us, go ahead and hit the follow button, and that way you're notified when we're going live. We will go live at 9 o'clock sharp next week.
Thank you for joining us very much, everyone.
Good times.